Friends, welcome. You are watching Ruslan Belov's channel, and today we will conduct a detailed assessment of the situation in Ukraine as of January 11th, 2026. Over the past 24 hours, a number of highly significant developments have taken place, so without unnecessary digressions, let us proceed directly to the operational overview. As usual, we begin with the line of contact, first focusing on the Zaporizhzhia axis, where offensive operations by the armed forces of the Russian Federation continue to gain momentum. At present, two major force groupings are actively engaged in this sector. The Dnieper force grouping operates on the axis from Primorsk and Stepnohirsk toward Orikhiv and slightly east of that area. At the same time, the Vostok force grouping is advancing along the course of the Haichur River. According to information released by the Russian Ministry of Defense, units of the Dnieper grouping significantly improved their tactical positions over the past day in the area of the settlement of Bilohirya. Based on official Ministry of Defense reports, as well as data provided by multiple cartographic and analytical resources, another adjustment has been made to the battlefield map in this sector. While the frontline configuration on January 10, 2026 looked different, updated information now indicates that this entire area is marked as being under Russian control. In addition, neutral, pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian analytical sources alike report an increase in combat activity in the area of Malotokmachka. It has also now been definitively confirmed that the territory of the former women's penal colony has transitioned under the control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. It should be noted that a number of mapping services, including our own, had already been depicting this site as controlled by Russian forces for some time. Overall, this confirms a clear intensification of Russian operations on the central Zaporizhzhia axis, particularly against the backdrop of advances west of the Haichur River. If we examine this bridgehead in greater detail, additional changes were also recorded here over the past 24 hours. The dynamics of combat operations on this sector have been clearly visible since January 8, 2026. Russian units are advancing incrementally, straightening the front line and steadily reducing the distance to key settlements such as Verkhnya Tursa and Zaliznikne. At the same time, it is important to note that information regarding advances in this area is primarily confirmed by pro-Russian and neutral cartographic services, while pro-Ukrainian sources have so far been slow to update their maps. Nevertheless, it is already evident that Russian forces have approached very close to Starokranka, Zaliznichne, and several other settlements. With a high degree of probability, combat operations will soon shift directly into these localities. These settlements represent critical defensive nodes, as both are located along a railway line. Once Russian units are able to overcome this railway barrier, the tempo of the offensive is likely to increase significantly. It is also clear that the two primary axes of attack are converging toward a single point slightly east of Orikhiv, in the area of the settlements of Omelnik, Novoselivka, and Huliapilske. It is here that the strike groupings are most likely to link up, while units of the Dnieper grouping continue their gradual advance toward Orikhiv from the western direction. Special attention should be paid to video footage released today by Russian sources from the Kamishuvaka area. These recordings show a large number of FPV drone strikes against equipment, vehicles, and logistical assets of the armed forces of Ukraine. These videos are of particular importance, as they clearly demonstrate a shift in Ukrainian logistical routes. Evidently, Ukrainian supply lines were redirected from Hryhorivka and Veselyanka further east, toward Kamishuvaka. However, this redeployment failed to secure Ukrainian logistics. Russian forces promptly repositioned FPV drone teams, which now exercise near-total control over the Konka River sector. As can be seen on the map, this area contains numerous suitable crossing points. One of the key routes passes through Kamishuvaka, while several others lie further west, near Hryhorivka. All of these routes are currently under dense and sustained Russian fire control. It should be noted that this sector contains a heavily fortified defensive area, surrounded by anti-tank ditches and saturated with numerous strongpoints. It is highly unlikely that Russian forces will attempt to seize this fortified zone through a frontal assault. Instead, we are likely to see an increasing number of combat recordings showing engagements along this network of strongpoints toward the western outskirts of Orikhiv. All of this indicates that the Zaporizhzhia offensive is now in an active and decisive phase. While Orikhiv itself remains some distance away, approximately 1 to 1.5 months of sustained combat, possibly slightly more or less, it is highly likely that fighting for the city will begin by the end of the winter period. We now move to the Dobropilya sector of the front. Today, neutral cartographic services report only minor adjustments here. Essentially, Russian forces are engaged in straightening the front line along the axis from Vilna and Novoshakov southwestward toward Pokrovsk. No crossings of the railway line toward Dobropilya have been recorded, nor has any advance toward Belitske been observed. Current activity is focused on stabilizing the line of contact, as well as likely conducting special operations aimed at identifying residual pockets of resistance and preventing Ukrainian sabotage and reconnaissance groups from infiltrating the rear of Russian positions. There are no large-scale offensive actions underway here at present, though intensive work along the front line continues. Meanwhile, important developments are reported from the Druzhkivka direction. According to available information, Russian units have advanced in the area of a major strongpoint, located in the southern part of Toretsk. This is a powerful fortified position which, according to several neutral cartographic services, has now come under the control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. The capture of this strongpoint opens the way for further advances deeper into the Toretsk area and toward the northeast, in the direction of Pavlivka, Novopavlivka, and the settlement of Pryut. This indicates that the Druzhkivka sector is gradually reactivating, with offensive operations gaining pace. Next, we turn to the Kostyantynivka direction, where Russian forces have been conducting active offensive operations for several consecutive days. Over the past 4 days, the battlefield map in this area has undergone substantial changes. In effect, the large-scale offensive on the Kostyantynivka axis began between January 5 and January 7, 2026. It was during this period that a significant volume of geolocated footage appeared in the public domain, documenting drone operations, artillery strikes, and air attacks. From that point onward, the front line began shifting in favor of Russian forces. The most significant adjustments were made yesterday, January 10th. According to published reports, Russian troops managed to enter the Kostyantynivka agglomeration from several directions simultaneously, from the west and southwest, improving positions in the central area near the railway station, and from the east via the settlement of Novodmitrivka. Based primarily on data from pro-Russian sources, a large-scale map correction was implemented. Today, this information has been further utochnено and confirmed by neutral cartographic services. At present, the main efforts of the Russian army are concentrated on advancing towards several so-called pockets in the area of the Kleban-Beek Reservoir. The first of these is located along the northern shore of the reservoir, where Russian forces are attacking from at least the western and eastern directions. A second major pocket is forming along the H20 highway between the settlements of Oleksandro Kalinove, Berostok, and further north toward Ilinka. This area is also being enveloped by Russian units from multiple axes. Overall, the task facing the Russian army at this stage appears fairly clear. It involves systematically improving flank positions around Kostyantynivka and effectively replicating the operational patterns seen in previous offensives, namely those at Pokrovsk, Mirnohrad, Bakhmut, and Chasiv Yar. The primary objective is to reduce the distance between forward positions from the southeastern, southwestern, and northeastern directions. At present, this distance stands at approximately 17 kilometers, which remains a considerable gap and still allows Ukrainian forces to use a nearly singular supply corridor to sustain the AFU garrison within the Kostyantynivka agglomeration. For this reason, Russian units are seeking to close in on this so-called black pocket. The main advance, as can be observed, is being conducted from the west and southwest. From the north, Russian forces have already reached the shortest feasible distance, while crossing the railway line remains a difficult task, particularly given the continued localized resistance by Ukrainian units in the areas of Popasne, Verolyubivka, Bilokuzminivka, and Fedorivka. Offensive operations in this sector will undoubtedly continue, but their tempo is likely to remain lower than that of the advance west of Kostyantynivka. In the near term, Russian forces are likely to advance towards Stepanivka, Dolha Balka, Roskoshny, and the settlement of Nikolopilya. Reaching these lines would reduce the distance between forward positions to roughly 10 kilometers, effectively establishing a Kostyantynivka kill zone and severely complicating the transfer of Ukrainian reinforcements. In that case, we would once again witness the implementation of a familiar scenario, previously observed during the battles for Pokrovsk, Myrnohrad, and Bakhmut. Next, we move to the Sloviansk sector of the front. Here, offensive operations are also unfolding along multiple axes simultaneously. Russian units are advancing from the Sviato-Pokrovska area along the Bakhmutka River, as well as from the direction of Siversk toward the west, gradually pushing forward in the area of Reznikivka and beyond Kotny. At the same time, units of the armed forces of Ukraine are offering serious and determined resistance in this sector. Along the Siversky Donetsk River, in the areas of the settlements of Zakotne and Kriva Luka, there are dominant high ground positions. These elevations allow control of terrain far to the east, all the way toward Siversk. For this reason, Russian advances in this sector are associated with significant operational difficulties and a slower tempo of movement. At the same time, the Russian army is increasing the pace of its offensive operations on the Lyman sector of the front, as well as on the Izium axis. With regard to the city of Lyman, information received today indicates that Russian units have managed to enter the southeastern outskirts of the settlement. These reports are being published by relatively reliable pro-Russian cartographic services. Russian forces are currently consolidating their positions in the area of the junction of highways T-0514 and T-0513. In essence, we are witnessing a repetition of the 2022 offensive scenario, as this is the same route along which Russian forces advanced nearly 4 years ago. Extremely important information is also coming from the Izium direction. This concerns a bridgehead that Russian units have managed to establish west of the Nitrius River. At present, this is one of the most dynamically developing sectors of the front, at least judging by the fact that maps across most cartographic services are being updated here at the fastest rate. The active phase of events on this axis effectively began around January 7-8, 2026. During this period, pro-Ukrainian sources began circulating information, claiming that Russian diversionary groups had reached the outskirts of the city of Lozova and started distributing leaflets throughout the city. These leaflets reportedly addressed local residents with a proposal, more precisely a strong recommendation, to leave the settlement and move toward Pesky Radkivsky or further west. According to the content of the leaflets, these appeals were linked to Russian plans to launch a large-scale offensive in the near future, ostensibly to minimize potential civilian casualties. From that moment onward, the front line on this axis began to change almost daily. First of all, in the direction of Sviatohirsk, where a significant volume of video footage appeared in the public domain, confirming the presence of diversionary groups operating within the settlement, which is located along the Siversky Donetsk River. At the same time, information began to emerge indicating that the settlement of Yarova was gradually being enveloped by Russian units from the flanks. On January 10th, reports surfaced regarding the infiltration of Russian diversionary groups into the settlement of Oleksandrivka. Already by January 11th, a large number of videos appeared online documenting the advance of Russian units directly in the Yarova area. These recordings show Russian soldiers crossing open terrain, and according to available data, approximately 40% of Yarova is now under Russian control. Reports also indicate that the line of contact is being straightened along the Oleksandrivka-Korovyi Yar axis, as well as the initiation of movement toward the settlements of Vovchi Yar and Lozove. In addition, video footage released today confirms that Russian units have fully established control over the settlement of Redkadub. Thus, the offensive on this axis is steadily gaining momentum. Based on how significantly the battlefield map has changed over the past few days, one can conclude that the defensive posture of the armed forces of Ukraine in this sector is extremely poorly organized. Particularly noteworthy are the high rates of advance, given that this is not merely a localized direction, but a push toward the M03 highway, which connects Sloviansk with Kharkiv. This road serves as one of the key supply arteries for the Ukrainian grouping across the entire Donbas theater. Reaching the settlement of Oskil, as well as advancing toward Izium through forested terrain, could fundamentally alter the operational situation in this area. Next, we move to the Kupiansk sector of the front, from which a large volume of video footage has been emerging in recent days. The most significant material today comes from the southern part of the settlement of Podoli. These videos are being published by pro-Russian sources, and although the image quality is poor, they clearly show a Russian serviceman raising the Russian tricolor flag in the southwestern part of the settlement. It was on the basis of this footage that another map adjustment was made. Let me remind you that as early as January 4, 2026, the Russian Ministry of Defense reported a significant improvement in Russian positions in the Podoli area, although no visual confirmation was provided at that time. The first footage indicating the presence of Russian units appeared only several days later, on January 8th. Those videos showed two flags raised on the extreme eastern outskirts of the settlement, and based on that material, the first corrections were made to the map. Now, 3 days later, another video has appeared from the southwestern part of Podoli, showing an additional flag. At the same time, the situation remains unclear in the areas of Kucherivka, the Zaporizhzhia microdistrict, Petropavlivka, as well as the central, northern and northwestern parts of Podoli. It is possible that Ukrainian units are still present in these areas. However, given the current configuration of the front line, it is evident that these forces are gradually being drawn into an operational encirclement, potentially without a realistic opportunity to break out in the near future. The overall configuration of the line of contact here is extremely unfavorable for the Ukrainian side. Some Russian advances are also being recorded in the central part of the sector. However, if we focus specifically on geolocations and the pattern of fire strikes, today the primary concentration of artillery fire, airstrikes and drone attacks is directed at the southern part of the entire Kupiansk agglomeration. In particular, targets in the areas of Kovsharivka and Novosinovi are being actively engaged. This creates the impression that at present the main operational emphasis of the Russian army is focused on this sector, with the objective of advancing toward Kupiansk-Vuzlovyi from the south and southeast. Overall, based on the latest incoming information, it can be assumed that the situation around Kupiansk is gradually approaching a certain logical conclusion, despite all previous statements and the earlier course of events in this direction. Next, we turn to the northern sectors of the front. In recent days, an increasing number of sources have been reporting that Russian units are gradually intensifying pressure on the next Ukrainian defensive line located north of the city of Sumy. According to available information, the Russian army is preparing for an offensive toward the settlement of Kotin, or more precisely toward the line of settlements situated between the village of Kotin and Marin. In the near future, high-tempo offensive operations should be expected in this sector. In addition, more and more reports indicate heightened activity by Russian reconnaissance units in the northeastern regions of Ukraine, specifically in the northeastern part of Chernihiv Oblast and the northern part of Sumy Oblast. That concludes today's briefing, friends. Thank you for your attention. Subscribe to the channel, leave your likes, and all the best to you.